the reason your podcast is such an important long-term thing is because it allows you to turn exposure into absorption. And the way to make money, real money with your podcast, real impact, real influence is through absorption. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode. Being a great podcaster is only half the battle. What you do before and after your podcast episodes is just as important, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. So I know I said I was going to do courses versus coaching today, but I wanted to do a little bit of a change up based on some conversations that I've been having. So today for episode number 50, why your podcast is such an important long-term thing. There was a long time where I didn't necessarily believe that everybody would find value in having a podcast. You know, business owners, local business owners, everybody, entrepreneurs, whatever it may be. Now I realize more than ever that it is one of the best things to do for yourself, your business, your influence, whatever, your overall success. And it's a simple reason why. Okay. I want you to think of two words. Okay. The first word is exposure. Second word is absorption. Exposure versus absorption. Now, this is all I mean by this. If you have a very large social media presence, okay, that's really good because you have a lot of exposure. You are exposed to a lot of people. You have the opportunity to impact a lot of people at one time. But the absorption, aka the level at which people digest your content, the level at which you're impacting people is not necessarily at the same level it would be if you had a podcast. Or you are able to turn your podcast into its own kind of business. So I think of it this way. If you have a bunch of people that follow you on social media, where are they supposed to go next? Well, a lot of people want them to go to something that costs money. And sure, they might do that. But the vast majority of people, I would say more people, will tune into a podcast about you talking about what you talk about on social media than will give you money. That is a example. That is a really good example of exposure versus absorption. And it's a very hard thing for me to explain because it's basically exposure is people seeing you. Absorption is you being able to add value, grow a relationship, and influencing a purchasing decision based on how much value and how close to you someone is. So I just think of it as a perspective of it doesn't matter if you have 1 million followers if you have no way to add value and then monetize that following. And this is why so many people go ads, sponsorships, affiliates when they're trying to make money. Because if you have a lot of exposure, it's easy to do that. But for most of us, we don't have that level of exposure. But what we can do is take the 1,000 people that follow us, try to get 500 people to listen to the podcast. Then from there, through absorption, we can add value. One of the reasons a Facebook group is so important is because it allows you to increase absorption. The amount of content, the amount of your personality, the amount of your brand that somebody is absorbing. It's how comfortable are they getting with you? How much are they becoming part of the family, part of the community? How big of a part of their life are you becoming? That is what absorption is. We get exposed to stuff all day. Here's an ad, here's a reel, here's a picture, here's a YouTube video, here's a song, here's a radio ad, here's another ad. That's all exposure. Absorption is really the level of commitment that somebody has to your business and your brand. So I think of it as I have people in my life who they might get exposed to a bunch of different cell phone ads or a bunch of different laptop ads, but their absorption rate with an Apple product is way higher. They're just way more invested in Apple products. They're way closer to Apple products. So they're almost always going to go the Apple product route, even though they get exposed to a bunch of other stuff. the reason your podcast is such an important long-term thing is because it allows you to turn exposure into absorption. And the way to make money, real money with your podcast, real impact, real influence, is through absorption. I want you to think of the artist or actor or actress that you are most connected to. That if I said, who is your favorite artist and why? What artist do you feel like you know the best? That is absorption. If I said to you, who is the most talented? That isn't necessarily absorption. That could just be exposure. I heard a song the other day that was really good, but I don't really connect with the artist. Those are two drastically different products, services, podcasts, songs, artists, careers. Those are just very, very different things. And I'm sure you can tell I'm trying to be very, very thoughtful with the words that I use when I explain this, because I know it's just a concept and it's very hard to make it concrete. But the reason, we'll just say Next Level University, our podcast, the reason that is so valuable is because when we do get exposure, okay, so I go on another show, say there's 1,000 people that listen to that episode, and say 100 people want to come check out our show. The business is set up properly where you actually turn the exposure, you turn the interest that you have into us, the interest you have in us, into absorption. Because then you go to the Facebook group and you say, wow, there's a post here every day. Interesting. Wow, there's a lot of engagement here. Awesome. Then from there, you might go to the mailing list or the freebie or whatever it is. That is why the podcast is so important.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and I'm host of the Business of Happiness podcast. When I met Kevin and Alan 2 years ago, I had no idea of how much impact they would have not only on the success for my business, but also on my life. They've given me enormous perspective and true strategies, true tactics to take in my everyday business plan and in my life plan to make an even greater success. Kevin and Alan, thank you so much. I couldn't even begin to express my gratitude for all you've done for me. And if you're looking for similar mentorship, I highly recommend these incredible experts at the Next Level University.
And here's the other thing too. You're listening to somebody right now for 10 to 15 minutes a week. So for those 10 to 15 minutes, I have some level of your attention. Podcasts tend to be something we habit stack with, so maybe I don't have 100% of your attention. But when you are exposed to someone, the next step, the next level of commitment is I want to be more absorption. I want to be absorbed more. I want more of what they say to absorb into me. That is why this is so important, because I might have an hour of your time every month. But if you feel the value of that, if you feel the relationship that comes with that, you might take the next step and go deeper into the business, which is even more absorption. It's almost like the longer you stand out in the rain, the wetter you're going to get. Now, if you run from your car to your house and it's raining, you're exposed to rain, right? You're going to get hit by some rain. By accident, really. If you stand out in the rain, you're going to absorb a lot of rain because you're sitting there pretty much with the understanding that that's what's going to happen. That's what I'm trying to get at in this episode. I understand it's a challenging thing for me to explain. Part one, because I haven't explained it a ton. And when I haven't been able to really, really paint a very good picture. So this is me trying to do that in real time. But I just think of it as the longer... Okay, if you run from your car to your house and it's super sunny out, you get exposed to the sun. If you sit out in the sun for 8 hours, you get sun absorption and you get a sunburn. The longer you can get somebody to spend inside of your brand, which is going to be, your podcast is going to be a big part of that, the more successful you will be. Because the more they'll feel that they know you, the more likely they will be to hire you for stuff, to post in your Facebook group, to like your social media content. That is why the podcast is such an important long-term thing, but it doesn't always seem like that in the short term because it takes a while for the absorption to actually happen. This is a good analogy for this. If you don't understand money, right? When I was growing up, I had no idea what money did. I didn't understand the fundamentals of money. It didn't matter. I was spending more money than I was making. If you gave me $1 million, I would have ended up broke because I didn't have the right system. So I could be exposed to $1 million, but I wasn't capable of absorbing that money and making it more because the system was broken. That is why when people come to me and say, I want more listeners, how do I get more listeners? The thing I always do first is I check to see if the business actually connects the way it should, because more listeners will not solve your problem if you're not set up for absorption. Over the long run, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because you'll quit or you won't convert listeners into more committed listeners or group coaching or courses or whatever it is. So I'm hoping that this will land as an extra reason why your podcast is such a crucial part of your business success, your brand success, whatever it may be, or why it's just important to you in general. It just gives you an opportunity to add a different level of value to somebody for a longer period of time. And after that happens, people are more invested in you as a podcast, as a business, as a brand, because they're spending more time with you. It's very hard to ask somebody to watch a 3-hour movie. Avatar, I think, is a 3-hour movie, or it might even be longer. But a lot of people who watch the first one are going to watch the second one because they are absorbed by it. They were absorbed by it. They were influenced by it. They're more committed because they like the first movie. I think of a podcast as the same thing. If they like your podcast, they're probably going to like your Facebook group. And if they like your Facebook group, they're probably going to like your live meetups that you do every month. And if they like that, they're probably going to like your mailing list. Now, again, is it 100% of your podcast listeners are going to come join your Facebook group? No, because not everybody should. Some people should just remain exposed. It's not for everybody. But the people who it is for are the ones who go for the absorption. So I wanted to do this as an episode, even though I said I was going to do courses versus coaching, which we'll do next week, just because this was a really big breakthrough for me. The podcast, if it's set up correctly, is a system that works. It's if A happens, then B happens. And if B happens, then C happens. And you can take yourself all the way through the alphabet. But the podcast is such a big piece of that. This is really why this landed for me. I had a coaching call yesterday with 2 new clients. And they said, yeah, we have a Facebook group. And we just invited a bunch of people from LinkedIn. And there's no engagement. And I said, interesting. Your exposure on LinkedIn created the opportunity to bring these people in, but there is no absorption. Why? Because they didn't come from your podcast. They're rebranding their podcast right now and they're going in a different direction, and they weren't in the direction in the Facebook group that they were with their podcast. So it makes a lot of sense. Anytime I've ever seen somebody with a Facebook group who just invites a ton of people in, it almost never gets engagement. Why? Because those people aren't absorbed. It's just exposure, right? This is why, I could message 1,000 people cold and say, hey, come listen to my podcast. Or I could work with the 50 people who listen to it every single week to further their absorption, and eventually they'll tell somebody about how valuable it is. It's just 2 different perspectives. It's 2 different understandings. So this is what I said to that client. I said, I want you to can your Facebook group completely, because it's probably not worth you trying to rebuild engagement with a bunch of people who shouldn't be there in the first place. They weren't there through absorption. And I want you to, upon the launch of this new podcast next week, start a new Facebook group. And if it works the way it should, people will go from the podcast to the Facebook group. They're exposed to the Facebook group from the podcast, which they're already absorbed in. Now they might join the Facebook group because they want to be more absorbed, and eventually they'll do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. That is my ultimate goal, to create that takeaway for you in this episode. I know it might be a challenging thing. I'm not certain I'm doing a great job at explaining it yet. I will get better in time, just based on the fact that this is a relatively new concept to explain. But if you can connect the dot of the podcast is one of the most important things you can possibly have long term, because it probably creates the most absorption, the most commitment, I think you'll be in a really, really good spot. As always, if this resonated with you, or if you have questions based on what I talked about today, please click the link in the show notes for a free 30-minute call. I'm not going to sell you on anything. We can literally talk about what we talked about today, and I'll try to explain it more specifically to you and your business and your podcast and your goals. That is always out there. I always want to talk to you and add value where I can. Next week, for episode number 51, we will do the courses versus coaching, because I had another conversation about that today, which was really powerful. So I wanted to jump in here for this episode because I thought it was important to share. I want to go with my ping, my intuition on that. Hopefully you found value in it. Next week for episode 51, we'll talk about courses versus coaching. As always, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all next week.